So with your permission, I've modified my talk a little bit because I really want to jump on some of the things that Marston and Bronek spoke about, and that we all have a role not only as surgeons, but also as educators, as the next generation of surgeons. And that presents unique challenges in the environment that we're working in. So one of my roles is that I'm one of the associate program directors for University of Toronto Orthopaedic program, and I'm also the chair of the curriculum committee. So it's directly my responsibility to try and troubleshoot how we go about making sure that we still have master surgeons in the next 30 or 40 or 50 years that will be able to look after us and our families as we age. So disclosures, I do have a paid educational consultant for both Stryker Spine and GE, but interestingly, I do not have any financial relationship with what I'm about to show you, and I'll explain to you the nature of this relationship at the end because I think it's very important. So in my role, I've looked at how we can improve education over the last 7 years, and I've really been playing with the concept of virtual reality as a means of optimizing how we go about training our residents and how we go about improving the quality of care we can provide with our patients. And I'll show you a few of the false missteps we've had along the way and where I think we are now and what the future holds in terms of this very exciting opportunity. So to start off, particularly in orthopedics, but amongst every residency training program that we can find across the world, I think that we've noticed some new challenges. So number one is we have fewer hours to train someone, and it's much harder to get to those 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in a residency, never mind a residency in a limited fellowship. The pandemic really highlighted some of this for us, where our rates of elective surgery significantly decreased, and our trainees were now 3 or 4 rows deep in a single OR, and while they could technically say they've attended more surgeries, they may not have had that deliberate practice where they're the primary surgeon and they're developing those skills that are going to save them for a lifetime. The other thing that's changed for us in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same as everywhere around the world, is that we've had a really big focus towards what we call competence by design. So it's not enough just to say that someone spent 3 months on your service or 6 months on a rotation and that they're therefore competent in, a specific aspect of orthopedics or neurosurgery. We really have to try and challenge ourselves as how do we go about measuring competency? And as I will, joke around with my foot and ankle colleagues, I'd say it's a lot harder to allow natural mistakes in spine surgery. If someone is fixing an ankle fracture and they put a screw in the wrong spot, they take it out and put it back and nothing bad happens. We don't have the same luxury in spine surgery, wherefore the way we evaluate and the way we allow our trainees to learn from the mistakes has to be much more deliberate and much more calculated. So, out of all these problems, we're trying to really find a solution and to say, how do we improve how we go about training our residents and improving the outcomes for our patients? So the problem with surgery is the way we teach hasn't changed in 150 years. We always say you see one, you do one, and you teach one. And really, the challenge is that the number of surgeries you need to see or the scope and breadth of what we need to learn is growing exponentially, but training is not expanded. We still have to train under the same amount of time and under fewer hours. So Marston brought up a really good point, which is one of the concepts that is really hard to learn from is that visual awareness or that ability to integrate 2D images into 3D reality. And we really started playing with this concept about 7 years ago, and we said, virtual reality may offer us some unique opportunities to train our residents, and we should really explore what this has to offer. So when we started looking at what is available, there's a lot of promises as to what VR can offer you. For example, I can train my residents anywhere and anytime. I don't have to wait for a specific pathology to come through the door. So if I want them to get really comfortable with, be able to do a T-lift, I can make them do determined practice in T-lifts in a virtual reality environment over and over again, and I can change the parameters of what they see or how they're able to practice. And if you look at the use of VR, particularly in the surgical fields, it's been growing exponentially. So we really looked at what the promises were, and if you do a lit review, A lot of people will tell you that virtual reality is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it really leads to this fantastic training. And if I'm fully honest, we didn't see this benefit right away. And there's a lot of pitfalls along the way that I really want to show you to be able to say, here's where I think we're going and where the advantages may be. So the first thing that we did about 7 years ago was we really tried to grow a homegrown solution, really see what we can do in our own labs and kind of determine whether or not it had any major value. So one of the programs that we have at Sunnybrook is that ability to do automatic segmentation, which we really have used in our oncology practices. And we thought we would repurpose this existing resource and see if we're able to at least do some basic patient-specific surgical simulation. And the easiest thing to start off with would be things like decompression. So we started off very easily. We said, listen, let's really take our junior learners and teach them the concept of understanding the 3D anatomy that surrounds a decompression and see if some deliberate practice ahead of time in virtual reality on the exact patient that they're about to decompress leads to improvements in the OR. So our first generation of a simulator is very basic, and I put it up there to show you exactly where we started off from. But we basically use some off-the-shelf technology that was available at the time. We used the software that we had in-house, and we determined whether or not we can make a simulation that actually provided residents some benefit. And eventually, we tried to improve it a little bit by adding some, environmental optics that made it look better. But I will say that this was fairly limited. And what we really learned was the first lesson is that it's really hard to compete with economies of scale. And what I mean by that is if every hospital across the world is trying to grow their own project, we're all going to hit the same roadblock pretty quickly where we don't have the same expertise and the same resources all trying to work towards the same problem. And we decided that even though we had some improvements, it wasn't worth the time and effort we were putting in. So the second thing we did is we really looked at purchasing an off-the-shelf solution, someone who had designed this and said, listen, let's try to see if this helps our surgeons and our residents into improving how they go about learning and practicing surgery. So there's a lot of excellent products out there, and I'm not aiming to either discredit or encourage any one of them. But really what we did is we were kind of naive and we just purchased 10 licenses of a prominent virtual reality module. And we really said, listen, let's see if we can help train residents and if we can supplement their education by using VR. And what we basically did is we assigned these to the residents and we monitored how often they would use them. And you could see that some residents were using them quite a bit, while some residents had almost no use, and they just turned them on and they turned them off, never to be used again. The other thing we realized that if you map out the use of VR by trainees per month, there's a rapid drop-off, where everybody starts using it at the beginning of residency, and quickly by the new year, it's almost unused at all. And I actually have to give a disclaimer. There's actually a false positive here where a few of the residents were actually using the VR headsets to play virtual poker and not to train for residency. So it accumulated some extra hours that were not legitimate. So we've quickly corrected that and locked the headsets out. But really, I think what we really learned from this implementation is that a lack of repetitive practice isn't always due to the willingness of the residents or the learners to use the VR. I give the analogy of how people read a book. So if we have a canned solution showing how to do a TLIF in VR, for example, residents will read it once and they'll say, okay, this is really good, I've learned a lot. And then they'll launch the same module a second time and they'll start saying, I already know how this story ends. And they won't read it a third or a fourth or a fifth time to develop what we think will be important clinical practice because the engagement simply isn't there. So this really led us to the concept of that we also have to make sure that we're applying the right tool for the right job. And one of the mistakes that we often make is to think that VR is a great tool that can teach entirely all of surgery to everyone. And I'm here to tell you that unfortunately, it's not true, at least not yet. So if I think of my duties and my role as a surgical educator, we really think of dividing both procedural and cognitive competencies. And what I mean by that is you have to teach someone what they need to know and also how to do things. So Bronick brings up a great example of saying, well, you got to be able to make sure that people can throw a good knot, because there's no point of teaching them the subtleties of an ALIF if they can't have the basic surgical techniques. So just, broadly speaking, we may decide that we have a list of both procedural and cognitive competencies that we want to apply. And where we made our mistake is that we have to list all the different educational tools that we have. And VR is one great tool, but it's not the only one. So Marcin brought up really good points where biosimulation may be something that is very important. Sometimes live surgery is the only way to teach someone a very high fidelity component of a specific surgery, but virtual reality has a role. I would never dream of teaching someone how to do a dural repair in virtual reality, because right now, the components of the muscle memory required, or that cerebellum development that we talked about and how to handle the dura, isn't there in terms of teaching someone how to do that in VR. Virtual reality is fantastic, however, to address what Marcin suggested, which is that ability to comprehend 2D anatomy into a 3D surgical planning and comprehension. So really, this is where the next evolution is. And I had the benefit of meeting an industry partner about 5 or 6 years ago, and I actually challenged them onto what they were doing. And they said, well, if you have a better idea, tell us what you want and we'll build it. So I have this great relationship with non-adversarial, which is a non-financial relationship. They don't pay me, I don't pay them. What really has been game-changing for us is a symbiotic relationship where I'm able to provide them content expertise or strategies in development, and they allow my university and my residents to use it for free. And what we've really worked out is what works well to design specific cases that allow us to do partnership that is valuable for both of us. So the model that we're based after is the concept of doing a cadaver lab. So the purpose is, well, you may not read the same book 10 times, you might attend a cadaver lab every year for the next 10 years, and you always learn something, because you learn not necessarily just from the cadaver, but you learn from the instructors that are there to walk you through a case, and you learn from how they teach and how they look at a specific problem. So we've tried to create something very similar in this environment, and I'm going to try to mute the volume so I can talk over top of it. But what we've designed in this virtual reality environment is essentially how a cadaver lab would work, but it allows us to bring real images with a very short turnaround time into an environment where people from anywhere in the world can log in simultaneously and have a virtual presence and really focus on what VR does well. And what VR does well is really to take those 2D images where some surgeons are just natural and can close their eyes and visualize this in 3D, and some people may not have it. But it allows us to do a lot of case planning and discussion, or even M&Ms on cases that have already taken place, and provide the technology that allows people to be able to access this regardless of where they are, regardless of the resources that have available to them. All they need is a $300 headset and a cell phone with high-speed connection, and they can participate in these type of case discussion and planning. And while we're not replacing hours in the OR on a one-to-one basis, I don't think this would count that you could spend 10,000 hours in VR and come out and be a competent surgeon. What I think it allows you to do is to maximize your ORX exposures and get more out of each surgery if you've done some planning and some consideration ahead of time. The last thing that we have to solve, which still is not solved, is how do we incorporate this into your curriculum? If I simply give residents headsets and I say, okay, plan your cases, I won't get the outcome that I'm looking for. So really what we're working now is how do we build this as educators into a clear delineation of where technology like modeling or like biomimetics or like virtual reality can lead to integration that is meaningful. So, for example, one of the things that we're looking at is an EPA's, we call this an entrustable professional act, or it's a test that they have to pass before they finish. I might say that as part of the assessment matrix, they have to go in and do a specific VR module or a VR case. And what I'm looking for is that ability to determine whether someone is actually has been tested and is competent, which is still kind of one of those unsolved mysteries. How do I prove that simply because someone is good in VR means they're good in real surgery? They may be great at playing video games, but they could still be a terrible surgeon. So where my area of interest now is really trying to figure out how we determine proficiency using these tools that literally translates to competency in real life. So what's next? I'm really excited to be a part of this organization, and NSpine has been a really eye-opening opportunity for me because it's great to see like-minded individuals from all across the world looking to see how we solve these problems. I think that where we need to go is to have this partnership between things like medical devices industry, academic universities, and international organizations that collaborate and bring all these expertise together and try to create a roadmap on how we all think is the best way to train people and get to the next generation. So I won't show the last clip out of interest and time because my time is done. But if anybody's looking to collaborate or has any great ideas, we're always looking for people that will help us get to the next generation. So I'm looking forward to hear from you. Thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity.